think of terms like Catch-22 or Odyssey, Lolita or Oedipal, they go beyond the stories they originated from. They become powerful descriptors and concepts intrinsic to the human experience, greater than any other adjective. Arguably, the greatest of these adopted literary phrases is the Heart of Darkness. As literary critic Harold Bloom correctly notes, the source material, Heart of Darkness, has been analyzed more than any other work of fiction. But why is that exactly? What Joseph Conrad's original work did was offer us two irrefutable truths about the dark side of human nature. It helps us to understand how human beings are capable of the worst possible evil, and, perhaps even more disturbing than that, it helps us to understand why you are capable of that evil. There is no greater horror known to man than to look inside oneself and see that twisted, primitive darkness, and realize that given the appropriate circumstances, you can become the most resentful, murderous thing. That is horror. Ever since I first read Heart of Darkness, I have been determined to understand the heart's various functions. I want to measure its dimensions. That way, I could come to terms with the most repressed, savage elements of my being, and thus never allow them to corrupt me. By my estimation, the Heart of Darkness can be defined in three different ways: as a location, as a thing to obtain, and a state of mind. Given the various concepts involved with explaining the Heart of Darkness, I will be splitting my analysis into 3 videos, each addressing those different definitions. I will be analyzing these 3 definitions by focusing on 3 separate works of fiction, where each individual definition is best exemplified. The Heart of Darkness as a location is best summarized in the source material. However, the heart as a thing to obtain is best summarized in the book's loose movie adaptation, Apocalypse Now. Finally, the heart as a state of mind is best summarized in a video game that was heavily inspired by the book, Spec Ops: The Line. Links to these videos will be in the description box when they are published. Today, we'll start with the first definition. For those not familiar with the basic premise of Heart of Darkness, allow me to provide a brief synopsis for you. The book narrates the journey of a European man named Marlowe, and the time he sailed up the Congo River on a steamboat. He wanted to travel to Africa after learning of job opportunities offered by an enormous ivory trading organization called The Company. Once he arrives there, he witnesses several savage things, not just from the natives, but also from the company's employees. While performing his duties, Marlowe learns about a man named Kurtz, who is in charge of a key trading location further up the Congo River. Apparently, he is so adept at gathering ivory for the company that he sends in as much ivory as all the others put together, and he makes the higher-ups fear losing their jobs. However, later on Marlowe's journey, the company's general manager informs him that Kurtz has fallen deeply ill and his station might be in jeopardy. The rest of the book from this point on deals with Marlowe's efforts to repair a steamboat, travel up the river to Kurtz's station, retrieve him, and then come back. Throughout the journey, we witness Marlowe's growing fascination with Kurtz, as various secondary characters speak of his accomplishments not just as a company employee, but also as a human being. Like Marlowe, the reader longs to meet Kurtz, to the point where it becomes an obsession. One may argue that this longing comes from a basic curiosity to see if the man lives up to the legend. Or maybe there's something else to it. The basic plot of the story might seem rather innocuous, and it is. The actual events that transpire in the novella possess very little excitement in terms of action. What isn't innocuous, however, is the story's subtext, the subtleness in Joseph Conrad's narration, and its insight into the psychology of evil. What psychologists have noted about Heart of Darkness is how closely it resembles 2 psychological concepts established by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Starting with the former, Freud established the classic model that divides the human psyche into 3 parts: id, ego, and superego. For the sake of time and clarity, I'll define what these 3 elements are in the most basic of terms. I'm sure you are all familiar with this motif: the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. In terms of Freudian psychoanalysis, the devil is the id, the angel is the superego, and whoever is in the middle is the ego. The id/devil is the part of your mind that seeks to satisfy the most impulsive, primitive desires, and it is not bound by morality or social convention, most of the time. The superego/angel is morality and social convention, and seeks to regulate our impulsive, primitive desires so we can function in polite society without getting into trouble. The ego is the mediator, trying to satisfy the id's needs while also aspiring to the higher ideals set by the superego. Another classic representation of these three psychic elements is the iceberg. Notice how parts of the ego and superego are above the water for everybody to see, while the id is completely submerged. Now this makes sense. If the id is also represented by a devil figure, then we would want to repress that and push it way down into our subconscious so we don't have to deal with it. Though no matter how much we push it down, it still remains a part of us. Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud, cleaned up some of the inconsistencies in Freud's theory and created his own concept regarding the repressed side of human nature: the shadow. According to Jungian analyst Anelia Jaffe, the shadow is the sum of all personal and collective psychic elements, which, because of their incompatibility with the chosen conscious attitude, are denied expression in life. When in civilized society, we aspire to become greater than we are, and do our best to avoid our primitive inclinations towards negative actions like greed, selfishness, anger, and the like. When the eyes and constructs of civilization reign over you, the inclination towards primitive action is negated. But what happens in the wilderness, where civilization is almost non-existent and your actions are not bound by punitive consequence? When analyzing Heart of Darkness through a psychological lens, Colleen Burke notes that Africa becomes a topology of the mind, its location, its shape, its cultures, its textures, its rhythms, its foliage, its hues, its wildness, all calling forth something lost in the psychology of the white European. Like I said at the beginning of this video, the Heart of Darkness can be interpreted as a location, and that location is undoubtedly the African wilderness, but it is also, simultaneously, a location in the mind. To travel up the Congo River into the primordial jungle is to travel through your consciousness into the unconscious id, into the shadow to meet the devil. And I'm not just speaking metaphorically either. When you venture to a place where you are not bound by law or punitive consequence, who knows what you'll become? Now you may laugh, but to do so would be to laugh at what Carl Jung and Joseph Conrad experienced when they traversed the wilderness of Africa. According to research done by Evan Smith for his book, Rape and Revelation, Joseph Conrad suffered a mental breakdown prior to writing Heart of Darkness between 1897 and 1898. Conrad's biographer, Frederick Carl, said that prior to writing the book, Conrad's life had begun to descend into his own kind of darkness, and that his creative imagination carried him down not into memory, but into the very chaos and extravagance of the unconscious. Stalled, depressed, ill, he had touched bottom, and had, in his own way, found his subject matter. Like Conrad, Jung noted that traveling through Africa was like a symbolic act. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung noted that the deeper he penetrated into the Sahara, the more time slowed down for him. It even threatened to move backward. Like Conrad, Jung suffered a mental breakdown around this time as well. What is most remarkable is that neither Jung nor Conrad ever met each other, yet their works represent the same insight into the human mind, with one doing it through a mythological lens and the other academic. When traveling from the conscious mind into the shadow, seeking out the heart of that darkness, you begin to understand your infinite capacity for evil. And in the wilderness, struggling to survive, one may be capable of anything. In The Journey to Hell, Satan, the Shadow, and the Self, Charlotte Spivak writes about Marlowe's journey. Parallel with the geographical retreat up the river into the wilderness is a temporal journey backwards in time, leaving modern civilization and returning to the lush vegetative pre-human swamp world, as well as a psychological journey deep into his own personal heart of darkness, where lurks the impulse to savagery that he had never acknowledged while in the deceptive milieu of a sophisticated city. Towards the end of the book, Marlowe finds Kurtz, after he has spent months detached from civilized society, to find that he has fallen ill and gone completely insane. He finds that surrounding Kurtz's station are several poles topped with severed native heads. He finds a report that Kurtz had commissioned for the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs. At the end of it, he handwrote a postscript that simply stated, "Exterminate all the brutes." Kurtz, in Freudian terms, can be viewed as Marlowe's metaphorical id. In Jungian terms, Kurtz can be seen as the heart of, well, the shadow. And coming face to face with this representation of your inner being, somebody who is savage and evil beyond all belief when he should have been this great being, would leave you contemptuous. In fact, at the end of the novel, Marlowe returns to Europe and looks upon the rest of civilization with aggravation. They were intruders whose knowledge of life was to me an irritating pretense, because I felt so sure they could not possibly know the things I knew. To his cousin, Kurtz was a great musician. To the Belgian journalist Marlowe happens upon, he was a great politician and leader. To Kurtz's fiancée, he was a great humanitarian and a genius. Why would a man noted for his talents and strength of character turn to such horrific acts of evil? In moments of great desperation, of survival, of resentment, in a land where any act is permitted, who knows what you may discover about yourself? Maybe, if you reach a moment of clarity like Kurtz did, you might look inside yourself and respond like he did.
Horror.